Hey guys, tonight we step into the chambers where velvet curtains hang heavy. Candlelight flickers across cracked mirrors, and the air carries the scent of powder, not the sweet kind, but the one that silently eats away at the skin. This is no longer Elizabeth radiant in victorious portraits, but the Queen spending her final night surrounded by jars, powders and whispers, trapped in a slow dance with vanity that will not let go. And a gentle warning. When you hear this story of beauty turned into poison, you might not sleep easily. You might not survive at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. In the meantime, leave a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. I love seeing the night owl community spread across every time zone. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Gently imagine yourself sitting in a room lit by candles, where time seems to slow down, and you are listening to every breath of history. Elizabeth I, the queen known as the Virgin Queen, was once the symbol of strength, of an England standing proud and firm against the Spanish storm. But the deeper you go into her final years, the more you will see a very different picture. An Elizabeth not radiant on the throne, but a woman imprisoned by the very mask she created. Did you know? A memorable official historical event is that in 1588, Elizabeth commanded an entire nation to confront the mighty Spanish Armada, and that victory turned her into a legend while she was still alive. Yet behind those praises, there was a detail few knew. When appearing before the soldiers at Tilbury, she wore silver armor and spoke like a general, but in reality, she still wore a thick layer of powder to cover a face already showing signs of darkening. A bit of humor here. Perhaps she was the first person to combine runway fashion with warrior cosplay, the style of fighting battles while never forgetting to keep the skin beautiful. But historians still debate the true extent of this image. Some say the speech at Tilbury recorded later had been polished to make Elizabeth appear as a mythical female general, while others insist she truly commanded the troops herself, displaying extraordinary courage. Either way, you can clearly picture this. Elizabeth always understood the power of image, and at times, the layer of lead powder on her face was no less important than a seasoned army. Close your eyes for a moment, and you will see a familiar scene from everyday life. Like when you prepare for an online meeting, not yet fully awake, but still quickly applying concealer to be camera ready. Elizabeth was the same, only instead of a Zoom meeting, she had to prepare to face all of Europe. One strange thing that few mention. The white powder she used, that Venetian ceruse, contained lead, and in the yellow candlelight, her face reflected like porcelain. Outsiders looking in were amazed, but those standing close by could smell the pungent scent of chemicals. And this very smell, some records say, caused many courtiers serving her for long periods to suffer from constant headaches. One could say that serving Elizabeth was no different than working at a toxic spa of the 16th century. Historians also debate, did Elizabeth know or not that the white powder was dangerous? Some documents note that she was warned many times. Even both statesmen and physicians advised her to stop. But it seems that in her mind, power was tied to appearance. A queen losing her beauty was no different than a palace losing its roof. Think about it. Even today, so many people still risk it all for fillers and Botox just to maintain a glossy face. Elizabeth was perhaps the very first influencer in that field. Only pity she had no Instagram to post her before and after makeup. At this moment you must also feel the air growing heavier, as if the tighter the room, the deeper the lead seeps in. You hear the soft hum of a small fan, as though it were the whispers of maids patiently brushing layer after layer of powder onto the Queen's face. And in that silence you realize, power and beauty are sometimes the very golden cage that imprisons a person. To help you sleep better, let me slip in a joke. If Elizabeth lived in modern times, she would surely be a VIP customer at Sephora. But she would also be warned, this product may cause nerve damage. You see, the closer to the end of her life, the more Elizabeth sank into layers of lead powder and layers of political deceit. It was not only the fear of losing beauty, but also the fear of losing the throne. And then, the greatest tragedy was that what she clung to became the very thing that slowly killed her. Listen carefully. like the steady ticking of a clock in a room, as I guide you deeper into Elizabeth's final years. After the Armada victory, she still stood firm like a lighthouse for England, but fate began to turn in 1562. That was when Elizabeth contracted smallpox. An official historical event. She lay unconscious for many days at Hampton Court, close to death, to the point that courtiers had to discuss succession. When she finally rose, smallpox left permanent scars on her face. And from then on, the obsession with beauty became a lifelong burden. What few mention is that after that illness, Elizabeth almost developed a strange love triangle between her, the mirror, and the white powder. The mirror to reflect the scars, the powder to cover them, and then the powder itself sewed new wounds. Imagine it, like using a TikTok filter on your face every day, to the point of not daring to meet anyone in real life without that filter. Elizabeth lived the rest of her life inside a filter made of lead. Historians still debate. Did this obsession come from Elizabeth herself, or from the political pressure she carried? Some say she was simply a victim of harsh standards. The Queen must be beautiful, young, attractive for diplomacy. But other scholars argue that Elizabeth deliberately turned herself into a living idol, a pale, ageless face, like an eternal symbol. Picture her every morning, sitting motionless for hours while the maids mixed powder, applying layer after layer onto her skin. The acrid smell of vinegar mixed with lead, the pungent scent of cinnabar lipstick, at times even blended with the odor of raw meat she tried applying to her face for rejuvenation. Chilling, isn't it? You lie in bed just hearing it and already feel uncomfortable, let alone the person living it. Another official event. By the 1580s, Elizabeth began to have unusual fits of anger. Many foreign ambassadors recorded that she often had trembling hands, short-term memory loss, at times gentle, at times raging. And the strange thing, it was precisely during this period that the mirror workshops in Venice thrived, because the Queen bought numerous special mirrors ground in curves, silver-plated to give a more flattering reflection. You may smile a bit. It turns out she was the first customer to invent the concept of a three-dimensional photo editing app. But historians still argue, were the signs of memory decline and confusion due to aging, or truly the result of chronic lead poisoning? Some modern doctors analyze that her symptoms match the typical description of heavy metal poisoning, while the other side says we are scrutinizing too much through the lens of modern medicine, forgetting that ruling an empire was enough to drive anyone mad. You can clearly see, Elizabeth at that time was both the reigning queen and the victim of herself. Imagine you being both CEO of a major company and at the same time a daily Instagram KOL, double the pressure, no room for rest. A little joke to ease you. If there had been detox spas in the 16th century, surely Elizabeth would have bought the lifetime VIP package. Only pity that spas back then were poison laboratories. When entering the 1590s, she almost completely withdrew from the public. Banquets became rare. Audiences saw her only in a dark room, candles dimly lit so that the cracked makeup was not too visible. That was the image of a queen gradually turning into a shadow. And then, by the final months of 1602, early 1603, Elizabeth seemed to step into another world. People recounted that she began to see the figure of her mother, Anne Boleyn, or her half-sister, Mary Tudor, appearing. With today's science, those were hallucinations from severe poisoning, but in Elizabeth's mind, it was a procession of ghosts coming to take her. One last official event before she died. On March 24th, 1603, Elizabeth I drew her final breath at Richmond Palace. The court announced a natural, peaceful passing. But what few knew, the person who prepared her body saw her skin grey, green, hair almost completely fallen out, teeth blackened, all typical signs of lead and mercury poisoning. And historians to this day still debate, was there or not a final letter she left behind, admitting she had destroyed herself by vanity, and hinting that someone in the court had deliberately encouraged her to continue. If that letter existed, then this was not just a personal tragedy, but also the most sophisticated assassination in history, assassination by cosmetics. Hearing this, surely your heart also sinks, like the beat of a drum fading behind old fortress walls. Elizabeth, once the radiant light of an era, was finally imprisoned by the very light reflected in the mirror. To not make you too heavy before falling asleep, let me slip in one last joke. Perhaps if she had lived in the 21st century, Elizabeth would have only needed sunscreen SPF 50+ to preserve her beauty. No need to buy warehouses of lead and mercury. You see, power, beauty, and the price to pay are always a story repeated in every age. Elizabeth left a lesson. Sometimes, what we think protects us is precisely what destroys us. And you, when closing your eyes, let your true face breathe. No powder, no filter, only skin, breath, and peaceful sleep. Imagine, the night is falling, the wind at the window gently stirs, and I whisper to you about a woman who once carried all of Europe on her shoulders, Elizabeth Tudor. But to understand why at the end of her life she was imprisoned within a toxic mask, we must return to the dawn of her life, where the seeds of tragedy were already sown. Elizabeth was born on the 7th of September, 1533 at Greenwich Palace, the daughter of King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. An official historical event. The English court at that time was in turmoil because Henry had broken with the Pope of Rome, just to marry Anne and hope for a prince. He believed that Anne would give him a son to secure the Tudor throne. But ironically, the child born was a girl, Elizabeth. In that moment, instead of the joyful shouts of a satisfied king, the court was filled with sighs. A strange detail that few mention. The astrologers at court had predicted this child had a star's light and could become a powerful monarch. But because she was female, the prophecy was dismissed, and some even altered the record to avoid angering Henry. In those days, a woman ascending the throne was nearly impossible. You may find this familiar. Like today, when a new startup is predicted to become a unicorn, but simply because the CEO is a woman, people immediately sneer that it is just media hype. Historians still debate, did Henry VIII ever love Elizabeth from the beginning? Some historians say that when Elizabeth was first born, he still held her, called her Little Treasure, and organized a grand baptism. But others insist. Henry was only cold, disappointed by the lack of a son. The truth perhaps still echoes only within the stone walls of Greenwich Palace. Elizabeth's childhood unfolded under the huge shadow of change. In 1536, when Elizabeth was only 2 years old, her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed. Henry accused Anne of adultery, treason, even witchcraft. Of course, many modern historians believe it was political theatre. Henry wanted to eliminate Anne to marry Jane Seymour. For little Elizabeth, that event was a wound that never healed. Imagine being a 2-year-old child, not yet knowing what mother means, when suddenly one morning your mother disappears, and then you hear whispers that your mother is a witch. That tragedy shaped Elizabeth's psychology. A little-known detail. To erase Anne's traces, Henry even ordered all her symbols and emblems in the palace destroyed, replaced with Jane Seymour's designs. The name Anne Boleyn was almost erased from court records, and Elizabeth was declared a bastard. For a child, this meant that from being a princess, she became nobody. Historians still debate. Did Elizabeth clearly remember the scene of her mother being led to the scaffold? Some affirm that memory was engraved in her mind, haunting her until the end of her life. But others argue that she was too young, and what she knew came only from retellings. Either way, that shock carved itself deep into her psyche. That love could be beheaded in a single morning. That power could turn someone from queen to criminal in an instant. After her mother's death, Elizabeth was raised in neglect. Henry VIII turned his affection to Jane Seymour, his third wife. Jane bore him Prince Edward, and suddenly Elizabeth fell another step down. From once being a potential heir to the throne, she became a shadow pushed aside. A strange detail. Although Henry seemed indifferent, he still allowed Elizabeth a full education. She was taught Latin, Greek, French, Italian, as well as music and dance. Teachers of the time noted her sharp intelligence, even surpassing many male royals. Like parents today, who may be emotionally distant but still want their children to have a good resume to show off, Henry did not show love, but he inadvertently created one of the most learned women in Europe. Historians also debate the motive. Did Henry want Elizabeth to be highly educated only to use her as a diplomatic pawn? A scholarly princess would be easier to marry off to European kings? Or was it truly his last small attempt to make amends to the daughter from whom he had taken her mother? In her teenage years, Elizabeth lived amid the dangers of court politics. Her father married more wives. Anne of Cleves, quickly annulled, Catherine Howard, executed, and finally Catherine Parr, the sixth wife. It was Catherine Parr who became the model of a kind stepmother, caring for Elizabeth and encouraging her studies. It can be said that without Catherine Parr, Elizabeth might not have grown up with the strong intellectual foundation to later reign. A little-known fact. Catherine Parr also allowed Elizabeth to access Reformation ideas, so that she absorbed both Protestant and Catholic teachings. This helped Elizabeth later skillfully maintain balance between the two sides. You may compare it to a modern child growing up in a multi-religious family, going to the pagoda with grandmother in the morning, to church with mother at noon, then hearing father discuss philosophy at night, and thus later becoming someone flexible, able to reconcile all views. Historians still argue, did this mixture make Elizabeth truly believe in anything? Some say she was a loyal Protestant. Others claim she saw religion only as a political tool. But perhaps it was precisely this ambiguity that helped her survive, because at that time, expressing faith too clearly could easily become an excuse to lose one's head. After Henry VIII died in 1547, the throne passed to Prince Edward VI, the son of Jane Seymour. Elizabeth was then only 13 years old, and officially became the sidelined princess in a court dominated by men. But fortunately, Catherine Parr, the final stepmother, still loved her as a daughter and allowed Elizabeth to live with her to continue her studies. An official historical event. Under Edward VI, England leaned entirely toward Protestantism, and Elizabeth was raised in a Reformation environment. This helped her bond with the image of a Protestant princess in the eyes of the people. Yet what few know, while living with Catherine Parr, Elizabeth fell into an extremely sensitive situation. Thomas Seymour, the uncle of young King Edward and Catherine's new husband, was rumoured to have behaved inappropriately with Elizabeth. People said he often entered her room in the early morning, even cutting her dress for amusement. This caused scandal, and in the end Elizabeth had to leave Catherine's house to avoid gossip. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth the victim of a forced illicit affair, or merely of political jealousy aimed at bringing down Thomas Seymour? Some records say Elizabeth once blushed when questioned, but she cleverly revealed nothing more. Perhaps it was from this incident that she learned a painful lesson. In the court, silence was sometimes the sharpest weapon. In 1553, when Edward VI became gravely ill, the court feared that a Catholic queen, Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, would ascend the throne. A succession struggle broke out, leading to the 9 Days Queen event with Lady Jane Grey. Elizabeth, at that time, chose to remain on the sidelines, not publicly supporting anyone. And you see, it was this wisdom that saved her. Jane Grey was quickly overthrown, and Mary Tudor, her half-sister, officially became Queen Mary I. A strange detail. Though sisters, Mary was always suspicious of Elizabeth, because Elizabeth was the symbol of the Protestant faction, while Mary was determined to restore Catholicism. Every time Elizabeth appeared, the people cheered, making Mary more uneasy. Some say Mary once said, "The throne I sit on, the people think belongs to my sister." It was like in a modern family, when the elder sister becomes the director, but the younger sister receives more praise from the staff. Cold glances are sure to arise. Historians still debate Mary's true attitude. Some say Mary sincerely wanted to protect Elizabeth, not wanting her to be drawn into bloody politics. But others insist Mary was jealous, even wanting to eliminate Elizabeth to secure the throne. The evidence is that after Wyatt's rebellion in 1554, an uprising against Mary because she intended to marry Prince Philip II of Spain, Elizabeth was suspected of being involved. An official event. In March 1554, Elizabeth was escorted to the Tower of London, the very place where her mother had once been imprisoned and executed. That moment was like destiny repeating itself. The daughter of Anne Boleyn, 20 years later, once again stepped through the cold iron gates of the tower. Imagine Elizabeth's feelings. The iron lock slamming shut, the echo of footsteps in the stone corridors, like a reminder that at any moment she could follow her mother's path. A little-known fact, when she was led into the tower, Elizabeth firmly declared, "I am innocent," and I trust God's justice will clear me. She even insisted on not passing through the narrow door for prisoners, but demanded to enter through the main gate, as a princess and not a rebel. That gesture, though small, showed her steel resolve. Historians still debate. Was Elizabeth truly innocent, or did she wisely conceal her connection with the rebels? Some documents indicate that Wyatt mentioned Elizabeth in his letters, but lacking concrete evidence. Mary was forced to release her sister. After several months in the Tower, Elizabeth was placed under house arrest at Hatfield Palace. And this was the crucial turning point. Elizabeth understood that her fate was as fragile as silk. She had been only one step away from death, just like her mother. But unlike Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth knew how to wait. During the years of house arrest, she read books, practiced politics, and kept silent before all sensitive questions. Like a skilled chess player, ready to sit still through many games, waiting for the decisive move. Then the opportunity came. In November 1558, Mary I died without children. Elizabeth, from the suspected princess, from the prisoner of the Tower of London, stepped before the people and was proclaimed Queen Elizabeth I. It is said that on that day, the people cheered across the sky and church bells rang in unison. And in Elizabeth's heart, there must have been both pride and trembling. From the child once called a bastard, from the girl who nearly died in a dungeon, she had now become the ruler of all England. You see, Elizabeth's life from the moment of birth had been covered by harshness. A cold father, a mother beheaded, a jealous sister, and herself nearly losing her life many times. But it was precisely those spiritual scars that forged her iron will, sharp political instinct, and extraordinary ability to survive. And from here, another tragedy began. In her obsession with betrayal, she chose not to marry, not to share power. A decision that both kept her throne and left her in loneliness. Take a slow, deep breath, let your mind drift, and I will bring you to that winter morning of November 1558, when the fate of Elizabeth Tudor officially turned. Mary I had just breathed her last after the years tied to the name Bloody Mary because of religious persecutions, and the court immediately needed a successor. Elizabeth, then 25 years old, was at Hatfield House when she received the news. She knelt in the garden, beneath the branches of an old oak tree, and read a psalm of thanksgiving, an official historical event. On the 17th of November, 1558, Elizabeth was proclaimed Queen of England. The people cheered, churches rang their bells, and the entire country seemed to sigh in relief after years of crisis. But few knew that moment for Elizabeth was both glory and fear. She remembered her childhood branded as bastard, remembered the months of imprisonment in the Tower of London. And now, on her shoulders was not only the crown, but also the ghosts of the entire Tudor line. A strange detail. Immediately after ascending the throne, Elizabeth chose for herself the image of the Virgin Queen. In that era, women who wished to rule usually had to rely on marriage, marrying a foreign prince to form alliances, or a local noble to secure factions. But Elizabeth declared she would marry no one, but wed her people. That decision both inspired the admiration of the people and shook the court. It can be said she turned singleness into a political weapon. Historians still debate. Did Elizabeth truly never love anyone, or did she simply hide her feelings well? Some records mention her ambiguous relationship with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, her close friend since her youth. But Elizabeth knew well, if she made it public, she would lose her standing. Thus she kept the relationship at the borderline of friend, lover, politics. A kind of historical friend zone, full of calculation. Imagine this, like a modern A-list star, knowing fans would be disappointed if she revealed a boyfriend, so she keeps it vague to maintain her appeal. Elizabeth did this with all of Europe, leaving many kings restless, waiting for a marriage proposal to be accepted. An important official event. In 1559, Elizabeth signed the Act of Supremacy, restoring the monarch's role as head of the Church of England. This was a bold step, affirming she would continue her father Henry VIII's path and reject the Pope's authority. But a lesser-known fact, Elizabeth was more skillful than her father in that she did not harshly persecute Catholics, but tried to maintain a middle way. She allowed people to attend Catholic Mass in private, as long as outwardly they respected the Church of England. Historians still debate, was this an expression of tolerance, or simply pragmatism to avoid religious wars? Some praise her as a humanitarian reformer, others say she was only politically shrewd. But clearly, thanks to this, England avoided the bloody civil wars like those in France at the time. Close your eyes and hear the music resounding in Westminster Abbey as Elizabeth entered her coronation in 1559. A pure white gown, her face covered in white powder glistening under candlelight. The new queen crowned not only with a golden crown, but also with a meticulously crafted image, a young woman, pure, rising above prejudice to rule. And from the very beginning, she knew the power of image was greater than doctrine. A strange detail. At the coronation, Elizabeth allowed both Catholic and Protestant rituals to be present. It is said that when she had to choose between two kinds of prayers, she skillfully smiled and let both be heard, like a modern pop singer cleverly blending a bit of rock and a bit of rap to please every fan. Yet behind those performances of image was a loneliness. Elizabeth could not fully trust anyone. She had once witnessed her father behead her mother, had nearly lost her life because of her sister's suspicion. Now, any noble could become a threat. That is why Elizabeth began to be obsessed with loyalty and control. Another official event. In the 1560s, when Robert Dudley's wife suddenly died in a fall down the stairs, rumours spread everywhere that Elizabeth herself had arranged it to be with her lover. A little-known fact. Many European diplomatic letters recorded this rumour, shaking her credibility. Elizabeth was forced to withdraw, to keep her distance from Dudley in order to protect the throne. Historians still debate. Was Dudley's wife's death an accident or a political plot? Some evidence shows the staircase where the incident happened was rather dangerous, but many believe it was the unspoken stain in Elizabeth's life. Either way, she learned another lesson. Even if one does nothing, appearances alone can be enough to be condemned. You see, the deeper Elizabeth stepped into power, the more she was forced to hide her true self. She could not be an ordinary woman in love, nor a vulnerable human being. She had to become an icon. And from here, the obsession with appearance, with preserving her beauty, began to take root. A little joke to help you sleep. One could say Elizabeth was the earliest influencer when the entire nation waited to see what outfit she would debut in today, and whether she would accept any marriage proposal. Throughout the 1560s and 1570s, Elizabeth gradually consolidated power, skillfully using marriage negotiations as a diplomatic tool. She received proposals from France, Spain, and many European duchies, but always cleverly declined. This gave England an advantage. No one dared to confront directly, because there was always hope of becoming royal son-in-law. A strange detail. Elizabeth also used the nicknames Gloriana and Astrea, figures of Greek goddesses, to promote herself as a divine symbol. Poetry and art of the time turned her into an ageless face, and historians still debate. Was this Elizabeth's own initiative, or something crafted by courtiers to strengthen her power? Take a deep breath in, then release it slowly, as if you're about to step into the endless corridors of Hampton Court Palace, where in 1562, Elizabeth Tudor fell ill with a sickness that nearly changed the entire history of England. An official historical event. In October of that year, Elizabeth, 29 years old, suddenly contracted smallpox. For several days, she lay unconscious in bed, her skin swollen and red, her breath rapid. Courtiers panicked, and throughout the palace corridors, whispers of succession echoed. If she died, to whom would the crown belong? Some mentioned Mary Stuart of Scotland, others named English nobles. For a nation that had only just stabilized after religious upheaval, the Queen's grave illness was nothing short of a storm warning. A little-known fact. When Elizabeth awoke, she saw that her face was no longer the same. Deep scars marked her forehead, cheeks, and chin. For an ordinary woman, this would have been a shock. But for a queen who had used beauty as a weapon of diplomacy, this was a political disaster. Many ambassadors had once praised her skin white as milk, a symbol of purity. Now, that image was shattered. Historians still debate, was it this very shock that created Elizabeth's lifelong obsession with appearance? Some say she had always liked to groom herself, but after smallpox, grooming became fear. Others say Elizabeth was a born actress, using appearance only as a political prop, and when she lost it, she was forced to rebuild it. Either way, clearly, from that illness onward, Elizabeth entered into a strange marriage. She wedded cosmetics. Imagine a morning in the palace. Elizabeth sits motionless, her face still red with scars, while her ladies bring her what was called Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar. They carefully applied it layer by layer, the pungent smell filling the room, making servants dizzy if they stood too long. After many hours, her face emerged like porcelain, smooth, stark white with no trace of illness. When foreign ambassadors entered, they marveled again as before. You see, Elizabeth had regained her soft power, simply through chemicals. A strange detail. This powder did not just cover scars, it also reflected candlelight, making her face shine brightly at banquets. The people believed the Queen had a divine aura, but only the ladies in waiting knew that beneath that glow, her real skin was being ever more damaged. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth know she was poisoning herself? Many records show physicians advised her to reduce its use. But Elizabeth replied, "I cannot let my people see my true face." And so, every morning she stepped into what today we would call a slow suicide by cosmetics. Compare it to the present. Like someone who lives by social media filters, so much so they dare not meet anyone in real life for fear of revealing their true face. Elizabeth was truly the pioneer of the filter addicts. This-id-for, a little joke to ease you. If Instagram had existed in the 16th century, surely Elizabeth would have posted daily with the caption, "No filter, natural skin," while in reality it was a thick layer of lead like cement. Another official event, by the end of the 16th century, Elizabeth became the center of portraits called the Mask of Youth, a series of paintings showing her with a face forever young. Though by then she was over 60, the portraits still depicted a queen without wrinkles, with smooth white skin. It was an entire propaganda campaign, keeping the people believing that the Queen was immortal. A little-known fact. To ensure a consistent image, Elizabeth ordered the destruction of any portrait that was unflattering or that revealed traces of age. Painters were even closely supervised, only allowed to use the standard facial model provided by the court. You can imagine, it was the classical version of Photoshop, except instead of digital edits, the changes were made right at the creation stage. Historians still debate, was this image control the will of Elizabeth herself, or constructed by courtiers to reinforce royal prestige? Some scholars believe she was truly obsessed, afraid that people would see her old. Others believe it was a political strategy, helping the court avoid turmoil as the Queen grew weak. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Elizabeth was both the stage actress of her own life and a victim of the crown's pressures. But time spares no one. Beneath the white powder, Elizabeth gradually revealed the symptoms of poisoning: trembling hands, memory loss, sudden anger. An official event. Venetian envoys recorded that the Queen often burst into anger for no reason. Her hands constantly trembled, and she sometimes stammered. These signs are now recognized as typical of chronic lead poisoning, a strange detail. To reassure herself, Elizabeth had special mirrors installed in the palace, mirrors ground in curves, making the reflection appear more attractive. Wherever she went, she wanted to see a pleasant view. Sound familiar? Yes, it was the ancestor of the Beautycam app. Historians still debate, were these erratic behaviors truly caused by lead, or simply political pressure? Some say anyone who held power as long as Elizabeth would become suspicious and irritable. But many modern physicians agree that the lead and mercury in her cosmetics were the silent culprits. Imagine her final days. Elizabeth withdrawing into the shadows, rarely appearing in public. When she did, she chose rooms with few candles, so the cracks in her powder would not be too visible. At each audience, the people saw only a thin figure, cloaked in splendor, her face pale and mask-like. Another joke to ease the atmosphere. Surely if she lived today, Elizabeth would be a regular customer of a paint company, not cosmetics. Because the powder she used every day was as thick as paint. By the end of the 1590s, all of Europe had begun to realize the great queen of old was no longer the radiant Gloriana. An official historical event. In 1601, Elizabeth had to face the Essex Rebellion, led by Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, a courtier she had once greatly favoured. The rebellion was crushed, Essex executed. But more importantly, this event left a deep spiritual wound in the Queen's heart. She had lost one of the last people she still trusted. A little-known fact: after Essex was executed, Elizabeth often kept a ring he had once given her, and sometimes sat gazing at it for hours. The ladies-in-waiting said her eyes grew misty, her white lead-painted face cracking as tears seeped through. But when someone approached, she immediately wiped them dry and returned to her cold demeanour. She was the Queen, and a queen was not allowed to cry. Historians still debate: did Elizabeth truly love Essex, or did she only see him as a spiritual son? Some documents describe her calling him by affectionate nicknames, while others note that it was just a performance to keep him within her political influence. Either way, Essex's death made her age 10 years in the eyes of her subjects. The older Elizabeth grew, the less she appeared. The court, once lively with feasts, gradually became a place of silence. When she was forced to appear, the audience chamber was always prepared with dim light to conceal the cracked layers of powder. People said that stepping into the Queen's room felt like entering an old church, heavy, gloomy, and filled with the acrid smell of lead, mercury, and tar-like perfume. A strange detail: Elizabeth had many special mirrors installed in her room, mirrors ground in curves. Whoever looked into them saw a brighter, smoother reflection than reality. You may smile a little. That was the first real-life filter in history, crafted by Venetian artisans. Historians still debate: did she truly believe in those mirrors, or only use them as comfort for her spirit? Some say Elizabeth knew the truth well, but needed a little illusion to keep living. Others insist she had completely lost the ability to distinguish between reality and illusion. An official historical event. In March 1603, Elizabeth stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and rarely left her room at Richmond Palace. She refused to lie on a bed, sitting only on cushions on the floor for many days, as if afraid that if she lay down, she would never rise again. Courtiers worried, but no one dared to force her. She grew emaciated, her hair nearly all gone, only fragments of white strands hidden beneath a heavy wig. A little-known fact: in her final days, Elizabeth constantly whispered to invisible figures. At times, she called the name of her mother, Anne Boleyn. At times, she smiled sadly as if Mary, her sister, had visited. Some even said she once reached out into empty space, murmuring, "I am not afraid. I only regret." Today, doctors believe these were the effects of lead and mercury poisoning, causing hallucinations and neurological disorders. But to her ladies-in-waiting, it was proof she was haunted by demons. Historians still debate: did Elizabeth leave behind a final letter? The rumoured document recording the truth of how she had poisoned herself for 40 years. Some believe James I had it hidden to protect the Tudor reputation. But to this day, that letter remains only a vague legend in the records. Imagine the scene: a night in March, cold winds whistling through the cracks of the door, candles burning low. Elizabeth sat there, her face thick with white powder, trembling like porcelain about to shatter. She asked for a mirror to be brought, but no one dared to give it. Courtiers feared she would collapse upon seeing herself. Finally, Elizabeth touched her own cheek, and her finger came away with broken powder. That was the last time she felt her mask. "Are you so?" A light joke, so you do not feel too darkened. Perhaps if she lived today, a doctor would prescribe her a bottle of vitamin C serum instead of a jar of white lead. If only she had known modern skincare, England could have saved quite a bit of money, and an entire royal tragedy. On the 24th of March, 1603, Elizabeth I drew her final breath. An official historical event. She passed away after 44 years of rule, ending the Tudor dynasty, opening the Stuart era with James I. The official record stated, "The Queen rested peacefully." But in reality, the palace was gloomy. Her body was wasted, her teeth blackened, her skin pale, her hair nearly gone. It took hours to prepare her corpse with makeup, to create the image of a queen sleeping in beauty. A little-known fact. Those who handled the funeral said her skin was nearly embalmed by chemicals, hard to distinguish between real skin and lead powder soaked deep within. They even had to scrape off layers of powder thick as plaster to reveal the corroded skin beneath. It was the death of a woman who had turned cosmetics into poison. Historians still debate. Did Elizabeth die naturally of old age, or from 4 decades of self-poisoning? With modern medicine, all symptoms point to heavy metal poisoning. But in the politics of that time, no one wanted to admit that a great queen had killed herself with vanity. Lean back a little more comfortably, breathe in deeply, exhale slowly. And let me tell you not only about the tragedy of Elizabeth I, but also about what she accomplished for England, the great achievements that gave an entire era her name. The Elizabethan Age. After the 17th of November, 1558, when Elizabeth ascended the throne, England was still a small, backward country, divided by religion and weighed down by debt. Yet only 4 decades later, when she left this world, that kingdom had become a naval power, its culture flourishing, and its national pride firmly strengthened. An official and most important historical event. In 1588, the English fleet defeated the Spanish Armada. This was not only a military victory, but also a decisive milestone that placed England among the great naval powers. Imagine the scene. Grey skies, Spanish sails like dark clouds approaching, but the winds shifted, storms rose, and the small yet agile English ships swarmed, delivering the mightiest empire in Europe a humiliating defeat. A little-known fact. Before the battle, Elizabeth appeared at Tilbury in silver armor, riding a horse, and gave her famous speech. "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England." Those words not only gave strength to the soldiers, but also entered legend. Historians still debate. Did she truly say those exact words, or were they later recorded and embellished? But what is certain is this. That image became an immortal symbol, proving that a queen could lead a nation in its hour of life and death. Another major contribution of Elizabeth was leading England out of religious chaos. After Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Mary I, the country was torn between Catholicism and Protestantism. Elizabeth, with skill, established what was called the Elizabethan religious settlement, a policy of compromise, officially recognizing the Church of England as independent, yet still allowing Catholics to worship within limits. You can imagine it was the classical version of a political compromise, like when a startup company blends both traditional and modern styles to keep both older customers and the youth. A strange detail. Elizabeth was not deeply devout. She was more pragmatic. Once she said, "I have no desire to make windows into men's souls." A rare statement showing she cared more about national stability than theological details. Historians still debate. Was that true tolerance, or merely a way to avoid conflict? Either way, thanks to this policy, England avoided the bloody civil wars like those in France. Another official event. Elizabeth managed the nation's finances with great prudence. When she ascended the throne, the treasury was nearly empty. She tightened spending, reduced debt, and cleverly used trade to enrich the kingdom. A little-known fact is that under her reign, England began establishing large trading companies, such as the East India Company, founded in 1600, paving the way for a later global empire. One could say Elizabeth sowed the first seeds that would make England the empire on which the sun never sets. Historians still debate. Did Elizabeth truly have such foresight, or did she simply happen to lay the foundations by chance? Some argue she merely wanted more income for the crown, but unintentionally pushed England onto the path of colonialism. Either way, the result was that England sailed into the open seas, reaching India, the Americas, and opening an age of exploration. Not only in politics and economics, Elizabeth was also a patron of the arts. Her era witnessed the flourishing of English literature, with William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser. The Globe Theatre rose, and plays like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet gained renown across Europe. Imagine, without Elizabeth's patronage, Shakespeare might have remained just an obscure playwright in a corner of London. A strange detail. Elizabeth rarely went to the theatre, but she allowed drama to flourish greatly. In fact, she enjoyed hearing plays read in the palace. Historians still debate. Did she truly love the arts, Or did she merely use art as a tool of propaganda? But no one denies that thanks to her patronage, England had its golden age of culture. Another lesser-noticed achievement: Elizabeth kept England away from risky foreign marriages. Kings from France, Spain, to Sweden proposed, but she refused them all. She used the marriage card as a tool of diplomacy, both buying time and making rivals cautious. This was the art of friend zone on a national scale. Everyone hoped, but no one gained anything. And thanks to this, Elizabeth preserved England's political independence. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth truly never wish to marry, or was she forced by circumstance? Some believe she once deeply loved Robert Dudley, but chose the throne over love. Others argue she used the image of the Virgin Queen as a political weapon, never intending to Wednesday. Either way, that decision helped her keep full power, something rare in the male-dominated society of her time. A symbolic official event: after the death of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587, Elizabeth, though reluctant, signed the execution order. This ended the great threat from the Catholic faction and strengthened Tudor authority. A little-known fact: Elizabeth once wept when signing that order, calling it the most painful decision of my life. But political reality forced her hand. Historians still debate, was she truly coerced, or had she calculated it all along? But clearly, after this event, Elizabeth had no direct rival left to challenge her crown. You see, throughout 45 years of reign, Elizabeth not only kept the throne for herself, but also laid the foundations for a new England, strong, wealthy, and culturally flourishing. From a small, debt-ridden, divided kingdom, she transformed it into a power respected across Europe. But it was also because she wished to preserve forever that image, the eternally youthful queen, eternally powerful, that, at the end of her life, she imprisoned herself within a toxic mask. A little joke to help you relax. If measured by modern KPI standards, Elizabeth was surely an excellent CEO, turning the company from bad debt into a multinational corporation. Only pity that the beauty care department chose the wrong product. Looking back, the legacy of Elizabeth I is a double-faced portrait. The radiant light of victory, culture, and trade, and the haunting shadows of loneliness and vanity. But it was precisely this combination that made her one of the greatest and most tragic figures in history. The woman once called a bastard, who nearly faced the axe, in the end left behind an entire era named after her. Pull the blanket a little closer. Let your breath flow with the story. For now, it is time to close the long journey through the life of Elizabeth I, the queen who carried within herself both light and shadow, both glory and tragedy. This will be a long ending, gentle as a lullaby, yet deep enough for you to feel all the greatness and fragility of a woman who turned an entire age into her name. Elizabeth was not just a name in textbooks. She was living proof that harsh fate could forge a person of steel. Remember the beginning. A 2-year-old child who lost her mother to the axe, branded a bastard, cast out from the line of succession. Yet, with intellect and skill, Elizabeth stepped out of the shadow of the Tower of London to sit on the throne. An official historical event, 45 years of continuous reign, a record in the Tudor dynasty. And in those 45 years, she achieved what few kings before her dared to dream, turning England from a small, debt-ridden island into a naval power equal to Spain and France. The people called that time the Elizabethan Age, as we call golden years tied to the name of one person alone. A strange detail, often overlooked. Elizabeth never called herself great or immortal. Titles like Gloriana or Virgin Queen were woven by others, but she skillfully kept them as her political armor. You may find this familiar, like a famous singer who never claims to be the Queen of Pop, but still smiles when the world calls her so. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth truly believe in the symbols she wore, or did she see them only as stagecraft? Some say she was genuinely obsessed with the image of the Virgin, enough to sacrifice her own happiness. Others say she was a master actress, using image to hold the throne. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Elizabeth was both queen of her nation and actress of her own life. Her greatest achievement, you surely remember, the victory against the Spanish Armada in 1588. That was not just a naval battle, but a declaration. England was strong enough to challenge the mightiest empire in Europe, and from Spain's defeat, the door opened for England to stretch across the oceans. But Elizabeth did not only know war, she also knew the art of reconciliation. Another official event, the religious settlement of 1559, laying the foundation for the Church of England that still exists today. In an era when Europe was drowning in blood over religion, Elizabeth chose a softer path, neither too extreme nor too lax. And thanks to this, England avoided many civil wars. A little-known fact: she did not like theological debates. For Elizabeth, religion was merely a tool to stabilize society. Once she said that she had no desire to make windows into men's souls. That was the honest confession of a queen who valued the peace of the realm more than arguing who was right or wrong in faith. Under Elizabeth's reign, English art and culture flourished. Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spencer all wrote their masterpieces during her dynasty. Imagine an evening at the Globe Theatre. The crowd pressed together, cheering, laughing, crying with Hamlet or Romeo. Meanwhile, somewhere in the palace, the Queen listened to those plays being read, smiling at the literature blossoming under her reign. Historians still debate. Did Elizabeth truly love the arts, or did she only use them to strengthen the image of the nation? But even if it was only a strategy, she inadvertently created a period still called today the Golden Age of Culture. A light joke to ease you. If there had been Grammy or Oscar awards back then, Elizabeth would have been the most powerful producer, since nearly every artist had to go through her hands to have a place. In economics, Elizabeth skillfully kept England from bankruptcy. She cut extravagant spending, tightly managed the treasury, and most importantly, encouraged maritime trade. An official event. In 1600, the English East India Company was founded. Small at first, but it was the seed that later grew into the great tree, the British Empire. A little-known fact. Elizabeth was not a person fond of risk, but she allowed explorers like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh to set sail in search of treasure and to establish colonies. Those voyages brought back silver and gold, and also planted the dream of empire. One could say, without Elizabeth, there would have been no empire on which the sun never sets. But you know, every light comes with shadow, precisely because she wished to keep forever the image of the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth refused to marry, refused to share power. That decision gave her full control, but also left her with indescribable loneliness. At the end of her life, in Richmond Palace, she was surrounded by curved mirrors and lead powder, speaking with the ghosts of the past. A strange detail. Even while dying, she still whispered to see a mirror, as if, until the last moment, image was what she clung to. And when her trembling hand touched her cheek, coming away with broken white powder, that was the moment tragedy reached its depth. The queen of an age, dying in the mask she herself had created. Historians still debate. Was that a slow suicide by vanity, or manipulation by courtiers who wanted her dependent? But perhaps the real tragedy was this. Elizabeth could not escape the pressures that her very age had placed upon her. You see, Elizabeth was a living paradox. A woman fragile in body, yet who defeated the Spanish Armada. A child branded a bastard, yet who became the queen of an entire age. A lonely figure in the room of mirrors, yet who brought to England the radiant light of culture and naval power. Perhaps it was precisely this paradox that left such a strong impression. Elizabeth was not perfect. She was hot-tempered, suspicious, even authoritarian, but she accomplished the greatest feat, turning personal wounds into national strength. A little joke before you close your eyes. If Elizabeth had a LinkedIn account, the achievements section would be so long no one could scroll to the end, but the personal life section would be empty. And now, let the story fade like candle smoke in an ancient chamber. Elizabeth I closed her eyes on a cold March morning in 1603, but her legacy remained. A powerful England, a golden age of culture, and a mirror, though distorted, showing how power and beauty could both save and destroy a person. Let this final meaning follow you into your dreams, that sometimes you don't need to keep any mask at all. For truth, sincerity, and peaceful breath are the most precious things. Good night, and see you again in tomorrow night's story.